HOA Karen called cops screaming as I returned early. She'd been hosting guests in my cabin. When I first bought the cabin, it was meant to be an escape. A quiet little place tucked into the woods, away from the endless demands of city life. The air was fresher. The nights were silent, and the cabin sat just beyond the reach of the HOA that governed the neighboring subdivision. To me, it was freedom. But freedom has a way of attracting attention. And in this case, it drew the watchful, controlling eye of the one person I had hoped never to cross paths with, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. She had her nose in everything. If a neighbor's grass grew half an inch too long, Karen wrote them up. If a car sat in the driveway instead of the garage, Karen sent a warning. Her power came from fear, and she thrived on it. I didn't live under her rules, but my cabin was close enough to her territory that she kept a suspicious eye on me. At first, I brushed it off. Her glares, her passive-aggressive comments, her constant suggestions about what I should do with my property. I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting. But little did I know, she was paying closer attention to my comings and goings than I ever imagined. It all started when I left for an extended work trip, 2 weeks away from a cabin. I told no one except a trusted friend who occasionally checked in. The cabin was locked, secure, and waiting for me when I'd return. At least, that's what I thought. Halfway through my trip, I got a strange feeling. Nothing specific, just a nagging suspicion that something wasn't right. So I cut the trip short by a few days and headed back earlier than planned. As I pulled up to the cabin late in the afternoon, I noticed something immediately off. The gate at the end of my drive was open, not just ajar, but swung wide like it had been used again and again. My pulse quickened. I drove slowly up the gravel path, and that's when I saw it. Cars, 3 of them, parked haphazardly around my cabin. It didn't make sense. No one was supposed to be there. And yet, through the cabin windows, I caught glimpses of movement. Figures walking around inside, laughing, music faintly drifting out into the woods. I parked my truck silently off to the side and walked closer. The closer I got, the clearer it became. Strangers were inside my cabin. They weren't neighbors. They weren't friends. They were people I had never seen before, lounging on my furniture, sipping drinks, treating my home like a rental. Shock gave way to anger. My cabin was supposed to be my sanctuary, my private space, and here it was violated. I circled around the side quietly, trying to piece together how this could have happened. That's when I noticed the key box near the door. Only it wasn't mine. Someone had installed a lockbox, a cheap rental-style one, hanging there like it belonged. And that's when the realization hit me like a thunderclap. Karen, the one person who always seemed to know when I was gone. The one who complained endlessly about wasted space and how property should benefit the community. She had access. She had opportunity. And judging by the scene inside, she had taken full advantage. I was still processing betrayal when the front door suddenly swung open. A woman I didn't recognize stepped out with a drink in her hand, startled to see me standing there. She froze, then darted back inside. Seconds later, chaos erupted. Voices shouting, feet scrambling, the sound of people rushing to gather their things. Within moments, the cabin emptied, strangers piling into their cars and speeding down the gravel drive. But one car didn't leave. Karen's. She appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, screaming into it with that shrill, entitled voice I knew all too well. She wasn't calling me. She was calling the cops. And from the sound of it, she was spinning a very different story. According to Karen, I was the intruder. The cops show up, and Karen spins her story. I stood frozen in disbelief as Karen screamed into her phone. Her voice echoed across the property, shrill, commanding, full of fake panic. "There's a man breaking into the cabin," she shrieked, pacing the doorway like she was in the middle of some twisted performance. I couldn't believe it. She was the one trespassing, the one hosting strangers in my home like it was a rental property, and yet she had the audacity to paint herself as the victim. But Karen wasn't stupid. She was calculating. She knew if the cops arrived first, her story would sound believable. It didn't take long. Within 15 minutes, flashing lights cut through the trees, and 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled into the drive. Gravel crunched under their tires as they blocked the path. Officers stepping out cautiously, hands on their belts. Karen ran toward them, tears streaming down her face. Crocodile tears, the kind only she could conjure. She pointed straight at me, shouting, "That's him. That's the man who broke in. He doesn't belong here." I raised my hands, calm but boiling inside. "This is my cabin," I told the officers. "My property. She's trespassing." But Karen was already pulling out her trump card. She waved her phone like it was irrefutable proof, showing them pictures she had staged. Her sitting inside, her friends lounging around, all smiles as if they lived there. She spun a tale about how I was unstable, how I had abandoned the property, and how she'd been keeping an eye on it for the community's safety. The officers looked between us, their brows furrowed. It was my word against hers. That's when I pulled out my own weapon, evidence. I opened my truck, grabbed the folder I had started keeping ever since Karen first set her sights on me. In it were the property deed, my ID, and, most importantly, footage from the small trail camera I had mounted near the gate. Just a few days earlier, it had captured her SUV pulling in and out repeatedly. The officers studied the paperwork carefully. They watched the footage, and slowly their expressions shifted. Karen's story began to unravel before her eyes. Still, she wouldn't stop. She doubled down, her voice cracking as she accused me of fabricating evidence, of harassing her, of being a dangerous man. The desperation in her voice was almost pitiful, but behind it was that same entitlement, that same conviction that she could bend reality to suit her. The officers separated us, questioning each of us individually. When they returned, their decision was clear. Karen had no legal claim. She was trespassing. Worse, she had been illegally renting out my cabin without permission. When they confronted her about it, she tried to backpedal, claiming it was a community arrangement, that she was just trying to help. But the evidence was stacked against her. The lockbox she had installed, the strangers I'd caught inside, the neighbors who had seen unusual activity around the cabin. It was undeniable. The officers told her to leave the property immediately, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in her facade. Her face turned red, her lips pressed tight, and though she tried to argue, she was escorted back to her SUV. She sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then she sped off down the gravel road, kicking up a cloud of dust. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. Sure enough, the very next day, I received a letter on HOA letterhead. It accused me of creating a public disturbance, of endangering community safety, and even threatened me with fines. The audacity was staggering. My property wasn't even under HOA control, yet here was Karen, wielding the board like a weapon. That's when I realized she was more dangerous than I thought. It wasn't just about trespassing. It was about power. Karen believed she could take whatever she wanted, twist the rules, and bully anyone who stood in her way. But she had underestimated me, because while she was busy scheming, I was building a case. And by the time I was finished, Karen wouldn't just lose control of my cabin. She'd lose the grip she had over the entire community. Karen's lies collapsed completely. After the police forced Karen off my property, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd back down. But if I had learned anything about her by now, it was that Karen didn't retreat. She regrouped. And true to form, within days she came back swinging, this time through official channels. The HOA letter accusing me of endangering community wasn't just bluster. It was part of a larger strategy. Karen was trying to flip the narrative, to convince her neighbors that she hadn't been caught trespassing, but rather protecting them from me. To her, my cabin wasn't just a building in the woods. It was a symbol of independence she couldn't control. I wasn't going to let her spin the story unchecked. I compiled everything: the deed, the trail cam footage, the police report, even written statements from the bewildered guests she'd lured into my cabin with fake rental ads. Piece by piece, I built a mountain of proof so high it couldn't be ignored. And then I did something Karen never expected. I brought it all to the community. At the next HOA meeting, word had already spread. Neighbors were buzzing, whispers filling the air before the session even began. I stood quietly in the back, waiting, watching Karen take her usual seat at the front, chin raised high as though she still owned the room. When the floor opened for discussion, I stepped forward. Calm, steady, no theatrics. I laid out the facts. I presented the footage on a projector, the images of strangers coming and going from my cabin, the lockbox Karen had installed, the screenshot of online rental listings traced back to her email. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face turned pale. She tried to interrupt, shouting that I was lying, that the evidence was doctored, but it was too late. Every image, every document, every testimony was airtight. The board members, many of whom had quietly resented Karen's iron grip for years, finally had reason to question her authority. Neighbors stood up, voicing their own frustrations. Stories spilled out. Times she had fined them unfairly. Times she had berated them. Times she had threatened to use connections to ruin their reputations. It was as though the entire community had been holding its breath, and now, with undeniable proof against her, they were finally exhaling. Karen's empire was crumbling. The board voted that night to strip her of her position. No more president's chair. No more weaponizing HOA rules against people. She stormed out of the meeting red-faced, her voice cracking as she hurled accusations at everyone in the room. But no one followed her. No one defended her. The queen of the HOA had been dethroned. For me, the victory was sweet, but it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my peace, my cabin, my life. When I returned home that night, I walked through the front door of my cabin with a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. The silence of the woods wrapped around me again, no longer tainted by strangers or Karen's shadow. Over the next few weeks, the guests stopped showing up. The cars disappeared. The gate stayed closed. My property was mine again. And the HOA, without Karen at the helm, the tone of the neighborhood shifted. People seemed lighter, friendlier, as though a weight had been lifted from the entire community. Karen, on the other hand, faded into the background. She still lived in the neighborhood, but her voice carried no authority. Her attempts to stir up trouble were met with eye rolls instead of fear. The woman who once commanded every detail of others' lives had been reduced to a cautionary tale whispered about at block parties. As for me, I never forgot the lesson. Sometimes people like Karen will push and push, convinced they can twist reality to fit their will. But all it takes is truth, patience, and the right moment to set the trap. And when they finally step into it, their power crumbles all on its own. In the end, my cabin remained what was always meant to be, a sanctuary. And Karen? She was left with nothing but her own bitterness. Locked out, exposed, and powerless against the very people she once controlled.